Morning or afternoon or evening, perhaps 2 a.m. I don't know when you're listening to this, but welcome to Civics at Home, the episode one, actually, because the other one was episode zero. That was just practice. And it is on YouTube also. If you missed it, let me tell you, it's amazing. So anyway, today is April Fool's Day, perhaps if you're listening to this on Wednesday. And if it is, well, awesome. But it's time to put away your fool's hat. And not that I didn't call you a fool. I just said the fool's hat. Take a break from that right now. And don't forget, if you are going to play any pranks on your family, you're kind of stuck with them in the same house, and you can't get away. So be nice because you have to live with them. Just some advice. Anyway, today's our topic, is to talk about government in crisis. This is not exactly what was on our list of things to do at the beginning of the school year because, of course, we weren't in the middle of a snaking pandemic at the beginning of the school year. But this is all related. This is all related to what we've been talking about. Government trying to do something to help is exactly what's going on. So that's our topic today, tying things together. And your homework for this week is finish part one of the checklist. There was a CPOMS the lesson to do, two little articles, and then an EDSB quiz. If it's any of that stuff isn't working, give it time. Especially in the morning, there's a lot of kids on EDSB, and there's a lot of kids on CPOM. So later in the afternoon, things tend to work better. And it's all due Friday, so no big rush. Part two of the checklist will be appearing shortly. You might have clicked to this video from that checklist, in which case you know where it is. And there's another reflection to do off of that. And again, all this stuff is due Friday at midnight, but don't wait till 11:30 because it might take you longer than that. The other homework is to pay attention to the news. There's so much going on right now. Not only the science of the coronavirus, but also the civics of the coronavirus. All really important stuff. So pay attention because it's your tax dollars they're spending. And of course, they say, if you get a good night's sleep, even if you're sleeping at different hours, that's fine. Right now, and get outside. I'm outside right now. If you hear the wind blowing or the neighbor hammering, well, that's just how it is sometimes. But it is nice out here, and the squirrels are also listening and being informed about civics. Enlightenment peoples. That's what episode zero was about, so this will be quick. They all had different ideas about what the job of government is, what the social contract means. Hobbes, the government's supposed to just keep order. Locke, nope, gotta protect your natural rights. Rousseau, the government does whatever the people want it to do because the people are the one in charge, we the people. So how would they think about what's going on right now? Well, before we talk about what's going on right now, you got to get some perspective on this. This is not the United States' worst or first crisis. We've gone through many different things and come out okay. Sometimes actually come out stronger after it's done than when we went into it. And here's just a few examples. First of all, the War of 1812, probably our first one. Yeah, that was a bad thing. We went to war with England again. You'll learn more about this next year in U.S. history. But Washington, D.C. was burned down. The country was imperiled, which means, yikes, we might get destroyed not long after we got started again. But we ended up winning that war, mainly because England got distracted by Napoleon. But that's another story for next year. It was tough on America, and we put through it okay. Much worse was, of course, the Civil War. The country split in two. Over 1 million killed because you got to count both sides because they were all really kind of Americans. After the war, which was bad, the South was destroyed. Atlanta was burned to the ground. It was bad stuff. It took a long time for the South to recover. Literally at least 50 years in some places, sometimes more. And to this day, some people are still upset about the same issues that led to the Civil War. People still argue about the Civil War. People are still mad about it. It was a really bad thing, the worst thing that's ever happened in the country, in my opinion. World War One was not so bad in action U.S. There was mainly a fight in Europe between countries in Europe, and we joined in kind of near the end. Again, when Germany sunk a few ships with submarines. It's a long story. But we jumped in the last year and helped turn the tide to win the war. Europe was destroyed. The United States, not so bad. But the worst thing was, or right at the end of that war, this germ, you might have heard of in the news lately as well, the Spanish flu. It wasn't actually from Spain. Actually, some people think it started in Kansas. But I'll tell that story later. It spread all over the place. It affected the troops near the end of the war. Troops started getting sick, and then coming home, they brought it back from Europe, even though it might have started here already. Either way, there were several waves, and all these things. About a quarter of Americans got sick. Up to 1 million died. It's hard to tell. The numbers are big, and people lost track. It was really bad. Way worse than what we're going through right now, actually. Not too long after that was the Great Depression. Very, very tough economic times. when a lot of people lost their jobs. About 25% of Americans that had a job lost it. Something like 40% of Americans wanted a job and couldn't get it. It was really bad. The government had to step in because there was talk of a revolution brewing. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, actually. Um, that led up to the World War II. That really ended the Great Depression because everybody had to go to work. The U.S. was fighting two huge wars at the exact same time on two different places across the world. Everybody was pitching in. A lot of people were in the armed forces, but then a lot of people were pulled in to work in factories and just cover other jobs. Everybody had to pitch in. There were shortages. There weren't a shortage of jobs, but there was a shortage of stuff because a lot of equipment, steel, rubber, oil, were all being used in the war effort, so there wasn't much for people that were here in the home front. It was a big deal. At the end of that war, though, we did come out stronger than we went in, actually. The late 60s was another big crisis time. It wasn't one thing, it was just a whole wave of things getting worse. A lot of assassinations, people upset about the Vietnam War, big protests, protests are, it's one way to show how you feel about things. But they were getting big enough that people were worried that the country was coming apart. A lot of people wanted different kinds of change. A lot of people didn't want change. It was a really tough time and then leaders getting killed was not good. President Kennedy and then his brother Robert and Martin Luther King and it was a bad, crazy time in the late 60s. And it went on to the early 70s, to be honest. And the country got through that. And Watergate was right at the end of that as well. It was a tough time, late 60s, early 70s. And of course, 9/11. The attacks killed over 2,000 Americans. I just saw on Tuesday that the amount of Americans that have died from coronavirus is more than died in 9/11. That's not really that fair comparison. They're completely different things. 9/11 wasn't just how many people were killed. I mean, that was awful. But that wasn't just that. It was that it changed how things are done. It changed laws. It changed how we look at the world. It made people nervous about terrorism when they really weren't that nervous before. And it got us into a long, long, long war in Afghanistan that we're still there in Iraq for many years as well. So that changed a lot of stuff as well. So we've gone through a lot of crises before. This is not the first one, and it won't be the last one, to be honest. This crisis, though, it is way less dangerous than the 1918 flu. That if you got that, you were in bad shape. This one, some people don't even feel they're sick, which is why it's so dangerous, because you don't know you're sick, and so some still are still fighting against social distancing and thinking it's silly. It's not silly. People can be sick and not know it and spread it to somebody else. And actually, even before people show symptoms, they feel fine for a few days when they can give it to somebody else. It's really a dangerous thing. And it's more dangerous for the country because it's less dangerous for individual people. That might not make sense, but it is true. And so the best way to do that is to flatten the curve. State and local governments are doing a lot more now than they did back 101 years ago in the last big flu pandemic, because we didn't know as much back then, and also it was started when the war was still going on, and it was really hard to get people apart, get people out of their factories. The government didn't want people to be scared, so they weren't really telling people to stay away from each other until it got really bad. So yeah, we're doing a lot more now than we did then, especially in some places. Tampa, I think, has done a really good job of this. Shutting down schools and social distancing and shutting down a lot of businesses, it's hard, and we're stuck at home, but it's a good way to keep things from spreading. And Tampa has not had it too bad yet. I hope it stays that way. And it's mainly because of distancing, flattening that curve, making it so that hospitals are not overwhelmed and they can actually take care of the patients that come in, both people that have the COVID-19 and also people that have other things. If everybody's full, if all the beds are full of sick people with the coronavirus, then how can they care for everybody else too? So to make it a lot better for everyone, you gotta slow down how fast it spreads. Tampa's done a pretty good job. Some other parts of the country, it's not good right now, but hopefully we stay not so bad here. So the government passed a huge stimulus last week. Congress passed it after arguing for a few days. Democrats, Republicans, Senate, and the House, they all kind of worked it out, made a compromise, and the president signed it on Friday. So it's a humongous stimulus package ever. The money is raining down right now. You read a little bit about this when you read about the different interest groups, different companies trying to get a piece of this big old pie. It's a big pie. $2 trillion. That's trillion with a T. Lot of money. Now, where's all that money going to go? Well, One thing that's gotten a lot of attention is relief checks. Almost everybody's going to get a check just to help out through this tough times. Encourage people to go spend some money at some businesses. People are really nervous, even if they have a job still. They're nervous about spending a lot of money because they don't know what happens next. So if you get some extra money in your pocket, maybe you go help a business, and that helps that business keep going. That's the point of that. Also, if people have lost their jobs, which a lot of people have, a lot of businesses are closing, and people don't have a paycheck. That's really scary. You have no paycheck. You have no way to get to work. You have no way to work because you're stuck at home. So unemployment assistance is going out to a lot of people for several weeks, at least several weeks. Actually, 13. Well, that's like 3 months, at least. That money is going out to different people. So that is good because again, you want people to stay home, and if they're forced to go to work, that's the better chance they're going to get sick. Also, people that can't afford the rent and mortgage payments. I mean, you got to have if you're social distancing at home, you need to be able to stay at home. And if you can't pay your rent because you're not working, that would be bad. So this gives people relief for that for a while. And of course, businesses have been hurt by this too. So it also puts out many hundreds of billions of dollars in loans and grants to businesses hurt by shutdowns, from small businesses to airlines to all kinds of places that have are suffering now because people can't spend money or they have to be closed. And so they're losing a lot of money with that. And finally, hospitals obviously are really important right now. So giving a lot of money to help them buy supplies quickly, also do things like set up temporary hospitals, just do whatever they can to help cut this down so people get well and we can get through this hard, difficult time. And by the way, as I was about to record this, I did see in the news that there's another stimulus maybe coming along, maybe another trillion or $2 trillion, but for works program, and which means like for building bridges and roads and railroads, all kinds of things that are have not the United States has not been spending a lot of money on stuff like that over the past couple of decades. So there's work to be done. And that sounds kind of like the New Deal, which brings us to what. But first, let's go back to the four Enlightenment peoples. What would they think about this stimulus? Well, Hobbes would be no. Government's job is to keep order. Why are you doing this? If people are starving, if people don't have a job, well, let them figure it out. It's not government's job, Hobbes would say. And matter of fact, you need to keep order. If they're rioting because they're out of bread, then you need to send in people to go beat them, because that's not order. Hobbes would not be very happy with this stimulus. John Locke, no, that would be better, right? You're supposed to protect life and liberty and property, and that's what the stimulus is trying to do: protect life, protect property, get things back to normal. So he would be okay with it. Rousseau, on the other hand, government exists to do what the people want. It's the people's money, right? It's our money, really. It's our tax dollars at work. So if the people want other people, the whole country, to be helped by this, then that's what should happen. The government should do what the people want it to do. So he would be pretty happy with how the stimulus is. Well, he would be happy about the idea of the stimulus, and hopefully it ends up working. So that's pretty much what they would think about that. Now we're going to focus more on the Great Depression, which is another time when the government spent a lot of money to try to help out a country that was in bad shape. So here's the thing about history. Those who do not understand it are doomed to repeat it. So this is not a history class. However, understanding what happened with the New Deal is kind of important, saying what the government is doing right now with the new stimulus package. Because the New Deal, up until now, was the largest stimulus package in the history of the United States. Now, this took place in the 1930s when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the president. It was also called the alphabet soup. You'll see why in a minute. Those are pretty cool fonts, aren't they? I like fonts. Anyway, so the Great Depression. It was a very complicated thing. Basically, everything collapsed in 1929. The stock market collapsed. Lots of people lost jobs. Business shut everywhere. It was a pretty bad time. And even worse, banks closed. Right now, there is bank insurance. So if banks close, you get your money back anyway of $200,000 at least. I think it went up actually, but I don't have that much money, so what do I know? All I know is you're covered if the banks close. Back then you were not. So if a bank closed, your money poofed, disappeared, gone. And people all over the country lost their savings, they lost their businesses, they lost their jobs, all at the same time. It was pretty bad. The president at the time was a guy named Herbert Hoover, who was not a bad man. However, he thought things would fix itself. He kind of had more of a Hobbesian way to looking at things, saying that the people will figure stuff out. So the government wasn't going to help too much. And things got really desperate by the early 30s. People were talking revolution even in Tampa, saying that things aren't happening, the government cannot help, and we're getting desperate. People are literally starving. Franklin Roosevelt ran for president in 1932. His main thing was things are going to be okay. We can get out of this. His campaign song was called "Happy Days Are Here Again," and he said when he was elected at his inauguration speech, his very famous line, "The only thing to fear is fear itself," saying that we just need to, try to push through things. Arguably, the greatest president in American history, arguably. But he had a program called the New Deal. Oh, by the way, here's some of the things. People are poor, people are jobless, there are lines for food, people wanted work and could not find work. And this is a classic picture about how awesome everything is, and people are waiting to get free soup because they're literally starving. It was really tough times, especially in the early 30s when the Great Depression kicked in, and nobody knew what to do. The government wasn't helping much. It was some desperate times. So the New Deal was his big program, and the idea was this: when he ran for president, he said he was offering a new deal for the American people, and that's what it was eventually called. Once he was elected, he was a Democrat, and the Congress at the time, in the 1932 election, the Democrats got control of the Senate and the House. So basically, what the president wanted to do, the president got done. Congress was passing things pretty quickly, and started getting everything running like that. What is the alphabet soup? Well, there were many different programs that they tried all at the same time. Basically, they're saying we need to try whatever we can to make this work, to make things better, because things are bad. So the Congress passed a lot of different programs. A lot of them were known by their initials, so they were called the alphabet soup. And some of the more successful ones were the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, and the National Recovery Act, the NRA, not the National Rifle Association. That's a more recent NRA. The NRA, this one was different. And what were they? Well, the CCC and the WPA were works programs. They both put people to work building things. Kind of like, like I said, I just heard, I'm recording this on Tuesday afternoon, and I just heard in the news about an idea that the United States should now have some kind of big program to get people working, rebuilding roads and such, which kind of sounds like these two programs. So we'll see how that goes. And some of the things they built back in the 30s are still in use now. People needed work, they hired them. The government paid for building bridges and hospitals and libraries and all kinds of different things to put people to work. And one of them is Hillsborough River State Park. That park was built during this time. And if you've crossed that bouncy bridge in Hillsborough River State Park, well, that was built in the 30s. It's been fixed up a little bit since then because it's kind of old. But it was built originally by the CCC. They built the whole park over there so people could go. And yeah, they did a lot of different things. They're just some of the things they did. There's work programs there. They built the Blue Ridge Parkway through the mountains in Virginia and North Carolina. If you've been on that driving, well, that was built by them. They restored things like there's the Washington Monument being rebuilt. They also hired the WPA also hired artists to write, to put on puppet shows, to put on plays, to do different things. So one, they had work, and two, people had something to do that was cheap or free because not too many people had money during the 1930s. So that's what they did. All right, so the NRA was another big program. This is not a works program. No, this was different. This was the National Recovery Act gave the president and Congress a lot of powers, including to put up set prices, to set the rules that businesses had to use to run, to make a minimum wage. The first time there was a minimum wage in the United States. And they were trying to make it so more people could work and businesses could prosper, but while giving people some work, trying to make it so there were more jobs out there. The thing is, it worked for a couple of years, but then in 1935, the Supreme Court ruled that a lot of these new powers were unconstitutional. They went too far, and the Blue Eagle of the NRA overstepped the bounds of what government should be doing, and they said you cannot make businesses follow these rules. So the NRA became voluntary. So businesses did not have to follow it. But if they did, they got that sign over there, the NRA thing, saying that they are doing their part. And so there were parades, and there were different ways that people were promoted to say, all right, when you see that eagle, that's where you need to shop because that business is trying to get the country up out of this depression. So that's where you should go. So to make sure that people knew about the NRA and would go to businesses that were supporting the NRA, the government made commercials basically like this. This was a lot of people went to the movies in the 1930s. They were really cheap, and there was no TV yet or internet, no Wi-Fi, no cell phones. How did people live? I don't know, but a lot of them went to the movies. And so before a movie, there would be some ads and different things before your actual main movie that you were going to watch. And so before some movies, there was ads for the NRA. Jimmy Durante is the guy who's in this one. He was a movie star, kind of, sort of. He was a comedian. He didn't sing very well, but that didn't stop him from singing in this clip right here. That goes something like this.
You've got a president now. He gave the land a new deal. You hold the cards, now you deal. You and you and you and you put shoulders to the plow. He gave us what we asked for, now pay him back somehow. Step out in front, get back of the president, and give a man a job. He bore the brunt, now bear with the president, and give a man a job. If the old name of Roosevelt makes the old heart throb, you take this message straight from the president and give a man a job. You look like a banker who drives your car.
I drive it myself, have a cigar.
Keep your cigar and hire a chauffeur, and keep a man from becoming a loafer. You look like a grocer.
No, sir, my job's extermination.
You must give your assistants each a nice weekend vacation.
And I'll need more men to kill the rats.
We want you to hire a crowd. You'll do good work if you hang out this sign that means no rats allowed. What's the matter with you?
I'm a very sick woman.
Oh, a hypochondriac. You must get a doctor for pneumonia, a doctor for insomnia, one for osmosis and two for halitosis, one for anemia and one for eczema, neuritis, bronchitis, phlebitis, St. or any other kind of an itis that will delight us. You must get a doctor for every disease you got. In that way, it'll give you lots of enjoyment. And in that way, madam, you will help to end unemployment. Now listen to me, everybody. Step out in front. Get back at the president and give a man a job. You know he bore the brunt. You know that. I know it. So step out and give a man a job. You know who's in back of this in the NRA? No? Well, I'll tell you. And when I do, it'll give you heart a throb. You take this message straight from the president and give a man a job.
So there you go. Jimmy Durante, give a man a job. So, but that's not all. The Great Depression was bad enough. People were losing their jobs. But something else happened completely unrelated to the Depression, and that was the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl was a big problem in the middle of the country. Over-farming, poor land management, people not sure exactly how to farm, setting out new farms in the early 1900s there in the middle of the country, set up the ground for disaster. And when it did not rain very much for a couple of years, and there were some big windstorms going on in there in like 1930, 31, the ground just started picking up, and it blew away topsoil. This is science. But the topsoil is the rich part where things actually grow in. And there's not a lot of thick topsoil some of those places out there in Oklahoma, Kansas. It's kind of dry. And when they didn't farm very well, a big drought and windstorm blew it all away. It caused severe damage. All that topsoil was blowing. That's a real picture. That's not photoshopped. Blowing into a town, I think that's in Texas. People, they called it black blizzards. That's sand. That didn't used to be a desert. That used to be somebody's farm, and that's what it looked like. after the Dust Bowl really kicked in. People lost everything. Some farmers piled all their stuff into the trucks like that and drove across the country, mainly driving west, looking for work, looking for anything because they lost their farms. If you're a farmer and you can't grow food, you have no money. Things go bad really quickly because they weren't very rich to begin with. That picture on the right is an extremely famous picture of a family just desperate, running out there and looking for somewhere to go. Really sad situation. The New Deal did expand, though, to help those farmers, to help restore the land. The whole program was started to plant trees, to teach people how to farm better. The farmers that had to leave their land, that's a camp there on the right side in California, where a lot of them were desperate, didn't have anywhere to go for a while. But by 1935 or so, they were work camps where they could live, and some of them stayed in California. And they were there when a lot of people needed to be pulled into factories to well, that's the next story. The results, well, this graph is it kind of shows you how bad things got. It shows you how bad the unemployment rate was during the New Deal. And those are people that did not have jobs that wanted a job. You can see it was, by some ways of measuring, it was close to 40%. It's ridiculous. That it has never, ever, ever been that bad before or since in the United States. You can see after the New Deal kicked in 33, it really started kicking in. Unemployment went down. And then there you can see 1937 and 38 it started going back up a little bit again because some of the programs are ending and people were a little nervous about the government still spending so much money, and so unemployment went back up again. But as you can see, then the graph drops completely off because we entered the World War II. And so that when Roosevelt was elected, that was his campaign slogan. We need action. We need something done. And people responded, and that's when he was elected first time in 1932. He had serious optimism. His whole idea was things are going to be okay. Relax. I got this. And being confident, even when he didn't feel that confident, kind of gave people hope because people really were desperate in the early 30s. But then in the late 30s, somebody else showed up. World War II, when Hitler shows up and starts invading, people started signing up. By the late 30s, there were people working in factories. By 1940, we were in the middle of World War II, and then there was no more unemployment because there were millions of people in the military, and then millions of people were needed to do the jobs that the former factory workers and everybody else used to do, but they were off in the army. So a lot of other people, including women, were called in to do those jobs in the factory. The whole country pulled together in the 40s. We won 2 wars at the same time, basically, and that ended the Great Depression because everybody was definitely at work. So, to recap, the whole thing was the government had to spend a lot of money to get things going again. In the early 30s. That's what's needed sometimes. Sometimes government needs to borrow a lot of money for the future because the present is pretty bad. And then pay them back eventually. By the 1950s, the government had paid back all the money they had borrowed to do the New Deal, and the country was going pretty well. So we'll see what happens with the current stimulus. The government does not spend big money like that, or like they're doing right now, unless the people really demand it. And they did in the 30s, and they are right now. Hopefully it works out as well. Hopefully it doesn't take so long to fix things. I think once the term goes by, things will get better way more quickly now than they did in the 1930s. But we'll see how long things takes. But you need to look back at history to see how things happened before to get a feel how they might happen in the future. Anyway, thanks.